Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today I want to take a look at one of the most important and some might say controversial figures within the Jedi Order, Qui Gon Jinn. The Coruscant native was always an outlier when it came to his views of the Force, and his actions as a Jedi Knight kept him on the peripherals of the Jedi Order and its ruling council. Today I want to ask the question, what would have happened to Qui Gon Jinn had he not been killed by Darth Maul during the invasion of Naboo? Would he have continued on to the dark side, as a lot of the members of the Jedi Council thought he would, or would he have remained in the light, or would he have remained in the middle somewhere? To understand Qui Gon Jinn, we have to go back to his origins. We covered this in one of our recent videos about Count Dooku, but let's do a quick recap. Qui Gon Jinn was originally from Coruscant and proved to be a very talented Force user. When he joined the Jedi, he was assigned to the Helios clan, named after the giant avian creatures of Bespin. His lightsaber teacher was Terasanube, a Cosnian Jedi Master who specialized in dealing with the Coruscant criminal underworld. Qui Gon Jinn would have a pretty typical upbringing as a Jedi youngling and always excelled at everything he did, which means he was usually at the top of his class. He eventually caught the eye of another talented Jedi named Dooku, who took Qui Gon Jinn as his Padawan. I think Qui Gon Jinn's relatively stable and normal upbringing has a lot to do with his future outlook and whether he'll go to the dark side or not. If we look at the Jedi Order during this era, as flawed as it was, it had a pretty good track record when it came to keeping the Jedi on the straight and narrow. Within the Jedi Temple, they had a set of statues of what were known as the Last 20. These were the individuals who had left the Jedi Order throughout its history, and considering how many people actually became Jedi, 20 is quite a small number to lose, and only a small portion of those 20 actually ended up being a Sith. So clearly the restrictive way the Jedi Order is run is effective at keeping Force users away from the dark side. It's a formula and curriculum that the Jedi have been perfecting since the beginning of time. One of the rules that the Jedi Order had was that its recruits must be brought in at an extremely young age, preferably before the age of 2, sometimes even younger. The point is, these new younglings need to come in as blank slates for the Jedi to mold. They can't have any competing ideologies or worldviews or even any connection to family members and parents. As cruel as this might sound, there is a good reason for this. In order to be a Jedi and avoid the dark side, an individual must not have any attachments to anything. They must be in complete control of their emotions, something that is very inhuman and difficult to do, especially if you're predisposed to be a very emotional individual. So the Jedi Order tried their best to create an environment that promotes this kind of behavior, which means focusing a lot on internal reflection and removing oneself from material things. And this is something that a Jedi needs to be exposed to from the very beginning. It's much harder to grow up in a normal society and then be forced to give up everything for a more minimalistic lifestyle. The Jedi Order was also a replacement for each one of their members' parents and family, which is a very important part of child development. A stable and safe family, home, and shelter will give a child a better chance at developing an emotionally healthy mindset. Now, obviously, a certain percentage of the population are predisposed to mental traits like schizophrenia and extreme depression. But preventing traumatic things from happening to a young one will definitely decrease the likelihood these traits will surface. Grouping these children into clans also helps create a smaller family group and shared experience, which also makes things easier for them to deal with. Anakin Skywalker was one of the few kids who was trained at an older age. He came to the Jedi Order with a lot of emotional baggage. First, there was the fact that he was a slave, and he was also separated from his mother, who he loved very much. He also was exposed to combat at a very young age, all of which made him quite traumatized. He never really found a way to control that emotion, and when he joined the Jedi Order, he was always seen as an outsider by the other Padawan. He was also far too powerful and considered a chosen one, which further isolated him from his peers. Then there was the death of his mother, which he had to witness firsthand. This greatly affected his mental stability, and by the time he was a teenager, he most likely was suffering from borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by inappropriate or extreme emotional reactions and impulsive behavior. This also made him more susceptible to the dark side and Palpatine's tricks. Rael Avarosa was also another case of an older individual joining the Jedi Order. He was around 5 when he joined. He was old enough already to have picked up some slang and fashion from his homeworld of Ringo Vinda, and from the beginning he knew he was different from the other younglings who all had adopted a neutral Coruscanti accent and Jedi garb. Rael would grow up to be a pretty undisciplined and irresponsible Jedi, which eventually gets one of his Padawan killed. Dooku had royal blood, which made him naturally a bit more arrogant than others, and when he finally found out about his royal lineage, he felt like he was destined for greater things than just becoming a Jedi. This pursuit of more would lead him to the dark side. Now, Qui Gon Jinn grew up within the system. He never had to feel like an outsider, and the Jedi Temple was the only home he knew, and the Order was the only family he had ever known. Any disagreements or feuds he had were with individuals within the Temple. He never really believed that the entire Jedi Order was going against him, but that was something that Rael Avarosa and Anakin Skywalker believed was happening to them. For Qui Gon Jinn, it was never personal, but more of a rational discussion about which interpretation of the Force was right. This concrete foundation that Qui Gon Jinn developed grounded him as he grew older. When he started his training as Count Dooku's Padawan, he was pretty typical for a Jedi, and it was actually very similar to his own Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, when he was younger. Qui Gon Jinn loved following the rules, and he was truthful and earnest. Dooku respected Qui Gon Jinn because of his honesty, but he would also go on to teach the Padawan to think for himself. And as Qui Gon Jinn got older, he started seeing flaws in the way the Jedi Order did things and their philosophy on the Force. Dooku would only go on to encourage this as he himself was growing further and further away from the Jedi every day. But again, that strong foundation within the Jedi Order shaped Qui Gon Jinn's criticism. Instead of being angry or combative with the Jedi Order, he was at most frustrated and mostly just trying to figure out how to solve the problem he saw within the Order. And that's another thing we need to highlight about Qui Gon Jinn. He was a man that had very little ego. He was also extremely humble. This was again due to his stable upbringing within the Jedi Order. While the younglings and initiates were well protected behind the walls of the Jedi Temple, they were also constantly being trained by older Jedi. While the Jedi teachers were never cruel, they always sought to challenge their initiates and invoked a sense of self-discipline on them. It's important for a child at a young age to develop this discipline and learn how to over obstacles by themselves without aid from adults or chemicals. Qui Gon Jinn was not only naturally talented, but he also was an excellent student and worked very hard to succeed, which he did often. This gave him all the self-confidence in the world, which lowered his ego and raised his humility. And because of Qui Gon Jinn's well-known humility, when he disobeys the Jedi Order, it's framed completely differently than, say, Count Dooku disobeying the Jedi Order. Dooku's transgressions against the Jedi Code were oftentimes due to arrogance and self-confidence. For Anakin, it was more of a pursuit of emotional satisfaction. For Qui Gon Jinn, it was a true pursuit of bettering himself and the Order. So when Qui Gon Jinn says to Obi-Wan Kenobi, "We cannot both work with our mandate or do what is right," this is a statement that is completely made from a rational point of view without ego. Qui Gon Jinn also always seemed to know what was right or wrong. Some people are just born with a great moral compass, and for them, taking a class in ethics would be completely a waste of time. An organization like the Jedi, though, must create rules for individuals who are a lot more lost than someone like Qui Gon Jinn. They developed these rules to keep the majority in line and safe from the dark side, but those rules weren't always perfect. Because rules are inflexible and very general, and the second they encounter a real-life situation, they begin falling apart. Qui Gon Jinn was the type of individual who could break rules and still be perfectly fine, because that's who he was. Ultimately, Qui Gon Jinn was a strong individual, and a strong individual has complete control over themselves. I don't see Jedi like Anakin and Dooku as evil or bad, because if you truly understand someone and their backstory and why they act the way they act, you'll either pity them or love them for who they are. Dooku and Anakin both felt abandoned by their parents. Anakin suffered great loss and tragedy at an age where he was unable to comprehend or deal with death. This shaped his development and made him fear loss. Dooku, on the other hand, pushed himself so hard to succeed without realizing that he was already a very talented individual. In a way, the biggest flaw that Dooku and Anakin both had was their inability to deal with themselves. So no, I don't think Qui Gon Jinn would have gone to the dark side, and one of the best indications on why is just look at how well Obi-Wan Kenobi, his Padawan, turned out. But that also doesn't mean that I think Qui Gon Jinn will remain as a Jedi. A few years before the Naboo invasion, he was actually offered a seat at the council, but Qui Gon Jinn was more of an old-school Jedi. He didn't have a taste for worldly things or power or rank. All he really cared about was finding true balance within the Force himself. And I think as he developed, his connection to the Force grew even more. He would begin to understand that the Jedi and Sith's way of viewing the Force was antiquated. There was no dark and light side. There's only the extreme and the balanced. And any individual who tries to fight and coerce the Force would become extreme. Because the dark and light side is in everyone, and as long as we don't allow it to control us, we'll probably end up being fine. So there you have it, guys. That's why I think Qui Gon Jinn would never really join the Sith. But let me know in the comment section below what you think. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.